Humanity did not expect the day to arrive when they would feel unheard in a place they helped build. For years, their voice had been respected inside the Great Hall of the Galaxy Council. It was a place where worlds met, where disagreements were solved through calm talks, and where unity was supposed to be the goal for everyone. Humans had worked hard to earn their seat there, and for a long time, their efforts brought balance to the entire interstellar network. But slowly, things had changed. What started as small requests from the Council had become heavy demands. At first, it was easy for the humans to accept them. They believed cooperation was the key to peace, and they wanted to show goodwill. But as time passed, the requests increased. It was no longer about helping each other. It started to feel like humanity was being used because they were capable, organized, and willing to help whenever a crisis appeared. The tension had been building for months. But the final spark came during a meeting that everyone would remember. The representatives from Earth had arrived early that day. They sat quietly in their designated seats, preparing their notes and reviewing the recent agreements. Their expressions showed calm professionalism, but beneath the surface, there was a kind of tiredness like people who had been patient for too long. When the council members entered the hall, the atmosphere shifted. A few species greeted the humans politely, but most of the council focused on their own discussions, barely acknowledging Earth's delegation. Once the session began, the council chair announced a new list of requirements for an upcoming galaxy-wide project. The demands were enormous, far more than what Earth could reasonably provide in such a short time. The human representatives listened carefully. They did not speak immediately. They waited for the chair to finish, then for the room to settle. When they finally stood, the hall grew quiet, because humans rarely raised objections unless absolutely necessary. One of the Earth delegates stepped forward. His voice was calm, steady, and respectful as he explained that the new demands were too heavy. He reminded the council that Earth had already committed large amounts of resources, energy, and skilled workers to earlier projects. He spoke about fairness, balance, and the importance of respecting limits so cooperation remained genuine. His words were thoughtful, but the reaction he received felt like a cold wind across the room. Several council members dismissed his concerns. A few even acted annoyed, as though humanity's request for balance was an inconvenience to their plans. Some simply told the humans that Earth was strong enough and could handle more, without considering the impact on the people back home, that their tone lacked empathy. It felt like they had forgotten that Earth was not a machine, but a home full of real families working hard to maintain their place in the galaxy. The human delegates exchanged glances. They had expected debate, maybe negotiation, but not this level of disregard. Still, they tried once more. Another representative rose to explain that the council's approach was starting to strain Earth's resources and spirit. She reminded the members that partnership was supposed to be based on understanding. But instead of listening, one of the high-ranking council members cut her off. His words were sharp and dismissive. He said the council had already decided and did not intend to change its plans. He suggested that Earth should stop questioning decisions and simply fulfill its obligations. The room went silent, not because the council member had spoken loudly, but because everyone felt the weight of his words. Even some species who usually disagreed with humans shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The human delegates did not react immediately. They took a moment long enough for the hall to feel the stillness. Their silence felt powerful, a silence shaped by years of patience finally reaching its edge. Then, in a calm and controlled tone, the lead representative simply said, "Earth cannot continue like this." He did not raise his voice. He did not show anger. He spoke the sentence the same way someone might speak a simple truth that could no longer be avoided. His words carried clarity, and that clarity echoed across the hall more strongly than any argument could. The council members looked confused. Many had assumed humanity would continue agreeing, no matter how unreasonable the demands became. They were not prepared for pushback, not like this. The human representatives gathered their documents and prepared to leave. Some council members called after them, insisting the meeting was not over. But the humans did not respond. They walked out with steady, coordinated steps, and their departure held more emotion than any loud protest. The observers in the upper stands, who represented smaller worlds and neutral parties, whispered among themselves. They could sense something important had just happened. Humanity's quiet walkout felt like a shift in the foundation of interstellar politics. Outside the chamber, the humans gathered to speak privately. They stood in a circle, their faces troubled but resolute. They knew leaving the session would have consequences, but they also knew they could not continue being treated unfairly. Cooperation had to be respectful to work. Without respect, their efforts would only lead to exhaustion and frustration back on Earth. A few young diplomats looked uncertain. They asked if walking out would harm Earth's position. The senior members reassured them. Standing up for fairness, one of them said, is never the wrong choice. Their tone was not angry. It carried a steady strength, something shaped by years of trying to create peace through patient communication. Back inside the council hall, confusion turned into unease. The council had never seen humans leave a meeting before. They were known for staying even during heated debates, always searching for solutions that would help everyone. Their sudden departure was a message, even if no one said the words aloud. One of the council members suggested sending a message to Earth right away, asking them to return. But others argued that humanity was simply overreacting and would come back once they calmed down. This assumption was repeated by several members who misunderstood the seriousness of the situation, but some species knew better. They had worked closely with humans on various missions and understood how they operated. They whispered among themselves, warning that when humans reached a breaking point, they didn't yell or threaten. They simply stepped back and changed direction. And when they changed direction, the galaxy usually followed, whether it was ready or not. Meanwhile, news of the walkout began spreading across communication networks. Footage of the quiet exit appeared on public channels. People and species from distant colonies watched the clip, replaying the moment when humanity stood up silently and walked away from the council for the first time. Many viewers felt uneasy. They were used to seeing humans help resolve conflicts, not create them, but the walkout didn't look like rebellion. Instead, it looked like a calm, steady refusal to accept unfair treatment. And that made the moment even more powerful. Back on Earth, the leadership received a detailed report. They read through every line, every exchange, and every remark made in the hall. They were disappointed, but not surprised. The pattern had been visible for months. Earth's leaders gathered in their own meeting room to discuss the next steps. Their expressions were serious, but there was no panic. They trusted their delegates. They knew the walkout was not impulsive. It was a decision based on long-term. Experience.Earth decided that until the Council showed genuine willingness to listen, humanity would pause all new commitments. They would continue fulfilling older agreements for the sake of partners who relied on them. But they would not take on more burdens just because others expected them to. This decision was announced calmly, without dramatic speeches. The message was simple. Earth wanted partnership, not pressure. Across the galaxy, the reaction was immediate. Some species supported humanity, saying they too had felt ignored by the Council. Others worried that without humans, large projects would fall behind schedule. A few criticized Earth for acting too independently, but even they couldn't deny the Council's behavior had played a big part in the situation. The galaxy had become used to relying on humans. They were known for stepping forward when a complex issue needed a steady mind. Their absence felt like a missing anchor in the system. And so, Part 1 ends with a simple but powerful truth. The Council had pushed too far, and humanity had finally reached its limit. They didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They simply walked away, and the entire galaxy felt the shift. If you want, I can expand part 2 next in the same style. After the humans walked out of the council chamber, a quiet shift began to ripple across the galaxy. It was not a dramatic act of rebellion, and there were no fiery speeches or loud protests. It was simply a withdrawal, a refusal to participate in a system that no longer treated them with respect. To some, it might have looked like inaction. To others, it was a signal that something important had changed. Back on Earth, life continued in its usual rhythm, but there was an undercurrent of determination. The people who had been involved in interstellar projects now focused on consolidating their resources, checking their systems, and ensuring that Earth remained self-sufficient. They didn't need to announce their plans loudly, because those who had been watching closely could see the change in their actions. Humans were still participating in trade, still innovating, but they were no longer extending themselves beyond reason. Every decision was measured, deliberate, and guided by the principle that respect must go both ways. Across the stars, other species began to notice the change. Humans had always been a reliable force in the galaxy, helping coordinate projects, mediating conflicts, and providing expertise when complex problems arose. The sudden quiet from Earth left a noticeable gap. Communication networks that had previously been busy with updates from human envoys now went silent. There were fewer messages, fewer project updates, fewer invitations to coordinate joint efforts. Some species were confused, unsure of what to do. They had grown used to relying on humans to solve problems. When humans had stepped back, the wheels of many operations slowed. Navigation systems that depended on human-built algorithms had minor delays. Trade routes that humans maintained efficiently required extra effort to manage. Diplomatic initiatives that humans had often mediated now stalled, as other species struggled to fill the void. The Galaxy Council, of course, tried to act as if nothing had changed. They issued statements insisting that Earth's absence was temporary. The humans would come back when the work required it. But the tone of these statements did not match reality. Inside the council chambers, some members whispered uneasily about the consequences of underestimating humans. They had long assumed that humans were flexible, patient, and willing to bear more than anyone else. Now, they were beginning to realize that patience has limits. At the same time, humans on Earth were not idle. They were quietly observing the galaxy, studying developments, and reaching out selectively to species they trusted. These communications were not about fulfilling the Council's demands. They were about maintaining connections, sharing knowledge, and ensuring that essential trade and collaboration continued in a fair and balanced way. Humans had always believed in cooperation, but this cooperation was now guided by choice rather than obligation. The change was subtle at first, but it became increasingly noticeable. Systems that had been smooth and efficient suddenly required more planning. Delays occurred in projects that once had no obstacles. Other species began asking questions. Why were the humans withdrawing? Was there a problem? Had Earth decided to cut ties completely? Rumors spread through interstellar networks, with some species expressing concern and others showing curiosity about how far humans would go in asserting themselves. Even among humans themselves, there were discussions about the future. Some young diplomats and engineers felt anxious, wondering if the withdrawal would be misinterpreted as hostility. Senior leaders reassured them. They explained that this was not about conflict, it was about setting boundaries. Humans were not refusing to participate in the galaxy. They were refusing to participate under unfair conditions. The difference mattered, and it shaped every decision that followed. As news of the withdrawal spread, some species began to reach out privately to humans. They did not want to challenge the Council directly, but they respected Earth's stand. Messages of support arrived quietly, offers of collaboration, shared research, and invitations to coordinate outside the Council's influence. These gestures strengthened Earth's resolve, showing that respect and fairness could foster cooperation even without the Council's oversight. Meanwhile, within the Council, tensions grew. Members who had previously ignored Earth's concerns began to feel the impact of their absence. Projects that relied on human expertise faced setbacks. Trade networks that humans had optimized were experiencing delays. Initiatives intended to maintain peace were losing momentum without human mediation. Some Council members began to admit privately that they had underestimated Earth's importance, though publicly they continued to maintain a posture of authority. The withdrawal also sparked conversations among smaller species. Many had quietly relied on humans for guidance and support in previous years. They noticed the absence and began to think about how dependent they had become. Some realized that humans had been a stabilizing force, a bridge between different cultures and technologies. Without their steady presence, the galaxy felt a little more uncertain, a little more fragile. Humanity's approach was deliberate and careful. They did not seek to punish the Council, nor did they try to force immediate changes. They focused on ensuring that essential functions continued while refusing to compromise their principles. This was a new model of engagement, one that emphasized choice, fairness, and mutual respect. It was a model that challenged the long-standing assumptions about how humans would respond to pressure. The Council tried to maintain control through indirect pressure. They limited access to certain projects, hoping to create urgency that would bring humans back to negotiations. But this approach failed. Humans adapted quickly, finding new ways to accomplish goals, strengthening local industries, and developing alternative networks. They demonstrated that they were not only capable of self-sufficiency, but could also offer new solutions to challenges that the Council had long assumed required their constant oversight. Across the galaxy, other species watched closely. Some were inspired by Earth's restraint and thoughtful strategy. They began to question the Council's methods and consider new ways of organizing collaboration. Others were skeptical, fearing that the withdrawal could lead to instability. But regardless of their perspective, all recognized one undeniable fact: humans were no longer following the old pattern of unquestioning participation. The withdrawal also gave humans time to innovate. Freed from constant demands, they could focus on long-term projects, exploring new technologies, and improving systems that had previously been stretched thin by Council mandates. Communities flourished as people worked on initiatives that mattered to them. The result was a quieter, more measured progress, but one that was meaningful and sustainable. Humans did not broadcast their actions widely. They did not need to prove their point with announcements or statements. Their approach was calm and steady, relying on results rather than rhetoric. And yet the galaxy noticed. Observers, analysts, and even some Council members began to recognize that the absence of humans created a vacuum that was difficult to fill in many ways. The quiet withdrawal was more powerful than confrontation. It forced the Council and other species to reflect on the role humans played and the value of their contributions. It demonstrated that respect and fairness could not be taken for granted, even by those who were strong, capable, and influential. On Earth, leaders continued to plan carefully. They engaged in discussions about the future, exploring how to build partnerships based on equality and trust. They emphasized collaboration with those who shared their values while maintaining clear boundaries with those who did not. The message was simple. Humans would participate in the galaxy, but not at the cost of fairness or principle. As weeks turned into months, the effects of humanity's decision became increasingly clear. Projects that had relied on human involvement struggled to maintain pace. Diplomacy without humans became more complex and slower. Other species began to adjust their expectations. Realizing that Earth's absence was not temporary in the sense of being dismissible, it represented a fundamental change in how humans would engage with the galaxy. The withdrawal also inspired other worlds. Some smaller colonies and independent systems saw on Earth a model for asserting their own needs without creating conflict. They recognized that standing up for principles could be done with calm determination rather than anger or aggression. It was a lesson in self-respect and the importance of thoughtful engagement. For humans, the pause was an opportunity. It allowed them to focus on their communities, strengthen relationships with trusted partners, and develop strategies for future engagement that emphasized fairness and respect. It was not a retreat, it was a deliberate, strategic pause to reassess and prepare for the next phase of participation in galactic affairs, by the end of this period. It was clear to everyone who had been watching. Humans had changed the rules of engagement. They would no longer be pushed beyond their limits. They would no longer be taken for granted. And through this quiet withdrawal, they had sent a message stronger than any argument or protest. Respect was no longer negotiable, and collaboration required equality, even without raising voices or demanding attention. Humanity had demonstrated its power, not through force, but through principled action. The galaxy was listening, and the consequences of ignoring this message were already beginning to you. After humanity's quiet withdrawal from the Council, the galaxy began to feel the subtle but unmistakable consequences. At first, these changes seemed small, almost insignificant. Communications were slightly slower. Some shared projects took longer to complete. Trade schedules required extra coordination. But as days and weeks passed, it became clear that Earth's absence had a deeper effect. Humans had always been trusted as problem solvers, mediators, and innovators. Many systems, trade routes, and peacekeeping efforts relied on their skill and patience. Their sudden withdrawal left gaps that were immediately felt by countless species across the galaxy. Projects that had once run smoothly now faced delays. Minor conflicts that humans used to help mediate began to linger longer than usual. Even simple cooperation between planets required more effort. As other species struggled to fill the roles humans had quietly handled for decades, in many ways. Humans had been the quiet backbone of interstellar stability. Their contributions were often taken for granted because they approached every task with calm, reliable efficiency. But now, with Earth choosing to prioritize fairness over endless demands, the Council and the wider galaxy had to confront a reality they had avoided for too long. Humans were not an unlimited resource. They could not be pushed beyond their capacity without consequences. Inside the Council chambers, the mood shifted. Officials who had previously dismissed Earth's concerns now realized the impact of their absence. Meetings became tense as members tried to address the gaps left by human withdrawal. They debated ways to reorganize projects, coordinate trade, and maintain peace. But every effort seemed slower, more complicated, and less effective. Some council members, who had once spoken dismissively about humanity, began to admit in private that they had underestimated the importance of Earth's contributions. These were quiet conversations, not public acknowledgments. The Council, after all, preferred to maintain an image of control. But behind closed doors, doubts began to emerge. Without humans, the galaxy was less efficient, less coordinated, and less stable. Other species began to notice as well. Many had relied on humans for guidance or partnership in collaborative efforts. They had come to trust Earth's consistency and dedication, often seeking advice or mediation in sensitive matters. Now, without that support, they faced uncertainty. Some species expressed concern, wondering if humanity would return soon, while others quietly questioned whether they could adapt to a galaxy without human involvement. Earth, meanwhile, continued its work, but in a different way. The people of Earth focused on building resilience, strengthening local systems, and improving efficiency without overextending themselves. They communicated selectively, sharing information and solutions only when necessary, and always on their own terms. There was no rush to impress or please the council. Instead, they operated with thoughtfulness, patience, and a clear sense of purpose. This approach surprised many observers. Some expected humans to retreat entirely or respond with anger. Instead, Earth remained calm, deliberate, and focused. They were not refusing to collaborate, they were simply refusing to participate under unfair conditions. It was a subtle but powerful distinction. Humans were proving that engagement could be guided by choice rather than obligation, and that cooperation required mutual respect to be meaningful. Trade networks that had depended heavily on human systems began to feel the strain. Some shipping routes experienced minor delays. Supply chains that humans had optimized now required additional oversight. Diplomatic missions that relied on Earth's mediators moved more slowly. These were not catastrophic failures, but they highlighted just how central humans had become to the smooth functioning of interstellar operations. The Council attempted to compensate for the absence, assigning other species to handle responsibilities previously managed by humans. While well-intentioned, these efforts could not fully replace the expertise and reliability that Earth had consistently provided. Mistakes were minor but noticeable. Miscommunications occurred more frequently. Some projects took longer to coordinate, and small disputes lingered. Without the guiding influence humans had often provided, other worlds began to reflect on their own dependence on Earth. Many realized that they had become accustomed to relying on humans to solve problems and ensure stability. The withdrawal offered a lesson. Relying too heavily on one participant could create vulnerabilities. Some species quietly began to develop their own solutions, inspired by the way humans had consistently balanced patience, innovation, and problem-solving. Humans themselves were aware of these effects, but they did not see them as an opportunity to boast or criticize. Their goal was not to demonstrate power, but to maintain principles. They continued to focus on projects that mattered, ensuring that essential trade and communication continued without succumbing to unreasonable demands. Every choice they made was guided by a sense of fairness, responsibility, and long-term thinking. The ripple effects were also felt in diplomacy. Humans had always been effective mediators in conflicts and disagreements between species. Their absence meant that minor tensions lingered longer than before. Meetings that once resolved issues quickly now required extra time and negotiation. Some disputes that could have been solved quietly escalated slightly before cooler heads intervened. Again, the changes were subtle, but noticeable to those who had been paying attention. Despite the challenges, humans did not act out of frustration or anger. They approached every situation with calm and thoughtful consideration. Their withdrawal was not meant to punish anyone. It was meant to establish boundaries and communicate the importance of respect. They demonstrated that principles could be upheld without aggression, and that a quiet, deliberate approach could have powerful effects. Observers from other species noted this carefully. Some were impressed by humanity's restraint and strategy. They saw that humans had the ability to influence outcomes without confrontation, and that this influence was rooted in integrity and competence. Others were curious about what Earth might do next, recognizing that the pause in participation could signal a long-term shift in the balance of interstellar collaboration. Even the Council began to feel the weight of the absence more acutely. They realized that for decades they had relied on humans to manage critical systems and solve complex problems. The sudden withdrawal forced them to confront an uncomfortable truth. Ignoring Earth's concerns had consequences, and those consequences were now visible across the galaxy. The withdrawal also allowed humans to focus on strengthening their own capabilities. Freed from constant external demands, they explored new technologies, optimized their systems, and developed strategies to maintain independence while still engaging with the galaxy on their own terms. Communities flourished as people worked on meaningful projects rather than simply responding to external pressures, while the Council attempted to maintain control through formal channels. Their efforts were limited. Humans demonstrated that collaboration could be offered on fair terms, but it could not be forced. This shift challenged assumptions that had guided interstellar politics for decades. Respect and mutual benefit were no longer optional. They were essential. The ripple effect extended beyond practical systems. Many species began to reconsider their relationships with the Council and with Earth. Some smaller colonies quietly followed humanity's example, realizing that standing up for principles could be done calmly and effectively. They saw that influence did not always require loud action or confrontation. It could also come from thoughtful, measured decisions. For humans, the withdrawal was also an opportunity to reflect. They reviewed past collaborations, studied the needs of the galaxy, and considered how they could contribute without compromising fairness. They strengthened alliances with those who shared their values, focusing on partnerships built on trust rather than expectation. The emphasis was on collaboration that was mutually beneficial rather than one-sided. Months passed, and the effects of the withdrawal became increasingly clear. The Council struggled to manage projects and maintain peace without the usual support from Earth. Other species began to see that humans had not left out of anger, they had left out of principle. And that principle, calm and steady as it was, carried immense power. Humans showed that influence did not come from dominance or pressure. It came from consistency, fairness, and the ability to set boundaries without creating conflict. By withdrawing quietly, they highlighted the importance of respect, and they demonstrated that collaboration could only succeed when it was equitable. As the galaxy adjusted to this new reality, one truth became clear. Humans had changed the rules of engagement. They would no longer accept unfair treatment. They would continue to participate, but only on terms that respected their limits and contributions. In doing so, they reshaped expectations across the galaxy, setting an example of how calm, principled action could produce meaningful change, even without raising voices or demanding attention. Humans had made a statement that echoed across star systems. Their absence was not absence of care, it was presence of principle. And as the ripple effects spread, the galaxy began to understand that a world as capable and committed as Earth could not be taken for granted. As months passed since humanity had quietly withdrawn from the Council, the effects were becoming impossible to ignore. The galaxy was still functioning, but it was functioning differently. Tasks that had once been seamless now required extra effort, and the absence of human participation had become increasingly obvious. The Council, which had assumed that humans would eventually return without conditions, was beginning to feel the weight of underestimating Earth. Inside the Council chambers, tension had grown steadily. Meetings that had once been routine became long and complicated. Projects that relied on humans for coordination and expertise were now stalled or slowed. The chair of the Council, who had previously dismissed concerns from Earth as minor complaints, now found themselves in a position of unease. Papers and reports showed delays, inefficiencies, and small disagreements lingering longer than expected. Privately, some Council members began admitting that humanity's absence had consequences far greater than they had imagined. In response, the Council decided to send envoys to Earth, hoping to bring humans back to the negotiating table. These envoys were carefully selected, diplomats, advisors, and negotiators who had worked closely with Earth in the past. Their mission was simple on paper: understand why humans had withdrawn and convince them to return. But the approach was cautious. No one wanted to escalate tensions further, yet the Council needed to regain control over important projects and ensure stability across the galaxy. When the envoys arrived on Earth, they were greeted with professionalism and courtesy. There was no hostility, no anger, no exaggerated displays of frustration. Instead, the humans they met were calm, measured, and confident. The envoys were given access to meeting rooms and communication systems, but the atmosphere was noticeably different from the interactions they had once expected. It was clear that Earth was in charge of the terms of engagement now. During their first meeting, the envoys attempted to persuade the human leaders to return to the Council without conditions. They explained the challenges the galaxy faced, the delays in projects, and the strain on interstellar trade and communication. Their tone suggested urgency, but humans listened carefully, asking questions, reviewing details, and analyzing facts. At no point did they interrupt or respond emotionally. Every answer was logical, deliberate, and grounded in principle. One of the envoys suggested that Earth's withdrawal was causing more harm than good, and that the Council's demands were not unreasonable. The humans replied that fairness and mutual respect were not negotiable. They emphasized that they had contributed extensively for decades and had always approached collaboration with patience and goodwill. However, being treated as a resource to be used without consideration for limits had crossed a line. Their decision to step back was not impulsive. It was a measured response to assure that future cooperation would be meaningful and equitable. The envoys were surprised. They had expected defensiveness, maybe some confrontation, but not this calm firmness. Humans were not arguing for advantage or power. They were insisting on respect. It was a principle that transcended politics and strategy. It was about integrity and fairness. The envoys could see that this was not about punishing the Council, but about setting boundaries and demonstrating that cooperation required balance. Outside the formal meetings, the presence of the Council envoys sparked conversations across Earth. Citizens and leaders alike discussed the implications of these interactions. There was a shared understanding that humans had changed the nature of engagement with the galaxy. They were no longer simply participants. They were defining the terms of how participation would occur. The focus shifted from meeting external demands to ensuring that every collaboration was meaningful, balanced, and sustainable. The Council, back in their chambers, struggled to adapt to this new reality. Without Earth's automatic cooperation, projects faced delays, trade routes needed more oversight, and peacekeeping efforts required additional attention. Attempts to pressure humans through indirect measures, such as restricting access to certain shared resources, were met with careful adaptation by Earth. Humans were capable of creating alternatives, strengthening local systems, and maintaining communication with other species on their own terms. This ability to respond strategically without aggression amazed some observers. Humans were proving that influence could come from calm, deliberate choices rather than confrontation. Their withdrawal did not create chaos. It created reflection. Other species began to notice that the absence of human involvement highlighted the importance of fairness and mutual respect in every interaction. The galaxy was learning a lesson without any shouting or threats. In private discussions, humans emphasized that they were not opposed to collaboration. They were opposed to being taken for granted. They welcomed discussions about mutual projects, shared knowledge, and interstellar problem solving. But all cooperation needed to be based on equality and respect. This approach shifted the dynamic entirely. Humans were no longer reactive. They were guiding the terms of engagement, showing that principle could shape strategy without creating conflict. The envoys realized that negotiation with humans would require more than persuasion. It would require understanding and genuine respect. Attempts to offer incentives or apply pressure were ineffective. Earth was willing to collaborate, but only under conditions that recognized their contributions and respected their limits. This lesson would not be easily forgotten by the Council or the other species watching closely. Over time, the effect of humanity's stance began to influence broader decisions. Smaller species that had relied on humans for guidance started to reconsider their own roles. They observed how Earth maintained its principles without creating unnecessary tension, and they saw an example of effective leadership grounded in fairness. Some began to adjust their own policies, seeking collaboration that was based on mutual benefit rather than compliance. Even in the council chambers, subtle changes occurred. Members who had once underestimated humans began to advocate for more balanced approaches with other species as well. The presence of humans, although distant, was reshaping perspectives. Their withdrawal was a quiet but powerful reminder that influence was not about domination or fear. It was about competence, reliability, and principle. Humans continued their careful oversight of essential interstellar operations. Trade continued along key routes, but Earth maintained control over scheduling and coordination. Diplomatic initiatives continued selectively, with humans offering guidance to ensure stability, but always on terms that aligned with fairness. This strategy ensured that the galaxy remained functional while demonstrating that Earth's cooperation could not be assumed. Over time, the Council began to realize the importance of listening rather than demanding. Some members started drafting proposals that emphasized dialogue, mutual understanding, and recognition of each species' contributions. They understood that humans had set a new standard, not just for Earth, but for how the galaxy as a whole should engage with its most capable and responsible members. Humanity's approach was deliberate and consistent. There were no sudden reversals, no hasty decisions. Every action reflected careful thought and a clear understanding of both immediate and long-term consequences. This calm, strategic patience reinforced the principle that respect could not be bypassed. Humans had not withdrawn out of anger. They had withdrawn to teach an essential lesson about cooperation, fairness, and integrity. The ripple effects of this approach extended beyond immediate projects. Interstellar communities began reflecting on their relationships with the Council, recognizing that authority alone could not ensure effective collaboration. Influence, they saw, depended on mutual respect, shared understanding, and recognition of limits. Humans had demonstrated that these principles could guide action in a way that was both firm and constructive. By the end of this period, it became clear to the galaxy that the Council's traditional methods of negotiation were no longer sufficient. Humans had set new expectations for engagement. Collaboration would be fair, principles would be honored, and respect would be essential. This quiet but powerful shift was reshaping the way decisions were made. Relationships were built, and trust was earned across the stars. For Earth, the approach was successful without creating chaos. Humans had maintained essential systems, ensured trade continued, and guided diplomacy where needed. At the same time, they had made it unmistakably clear that cooperation could not occur at the expense of fairness. The message was simple. The Galaxy Council could no longer take humans for granted. In every conversation, every decision, and every interaction, humans demonstrated that their withdrawal was not weakness or defiance. It was a statement of principle. It was a reminder that influence comes from integrity and competence, not from fear or dominance. And it was a lesson that the Council and the galaxy at large would not forget anytime soon. As time passed, humanity's decision to step back from the Council began to take on a new shape. It was no longer just a pause or withdrawal. It had become a deliberate, strategic redirection. Earth focused on its own development, strengthening communities, and creating partnerships that were built on trust and mutual respect. Unlike before, these collaborations were not imposed by the Council or dictated by their demands. They were carefully chosen, thoughtful connections that reflected shared values and long-term vision. Humans started looking beyond the Council. toward the wider galaxy in ways they had not fully explored before. For decades, much of their attention had been directed toward fulfilling responsibilities and obligations to the Council, often leaving little room for independent exploration of new alliances. Now, freed from those pressures, they had the opportunity to build partnerships on their own terms. Other species noticed this change immediately. Some worlds approached Earth quietly, sending messages of interest in cooperation outside the Council's direct influence. These species did not seek to confront the Council or challenge its authority. They simply recognized that humans offered a model of collaboration that was fair, consistent, and principled. Humans listened carefully to each proposal, assessing whether the partnership would be mutually beneficial and respectful. Decisions were deliberate, with no rush to respond simply to appease others. Trade, technology exchange, and research initiatives flourished under this new approach. Humans focused on projects that were meaningful, impactful, and sustainable. Resources were used efficiently, communities were engaged in decision-making, and innovation was encouraged without external pressure. This created a sense of stability on Earth, while simultaneously demonstrating to the galaxy that humans were capable of managing interstellar relationships without needing constant oversight from the Council. One of the most noticeable effects of humanity's new direction was how other species responded. Some worlds that had long relied on the Council's directives began to adopt a more independent approach themselves. They observed how humans carefully selected alliances and pursued projects with intention, and they realized that cooperation could exist without blind compliance. The idea of choice, respect, and balanced engagement began spreading quietly across the stars. Earth also began strengthening its own local networks. Communities on the planet were encouraged to participate in interstellar projects selectively, based on their capacity and interest. People were not pressured to meet quotas or deadlines dictated by external authorities. This approach fostered innovation, creativity, and a sense of ownership over every contribution. When humans worked with others, it was because it made sense and was meaningful, not because they were expected to comply. As the months continued, it became evident that humans were creating a new model for engagement. They were showing the galaxy that influence was not achieved by dominance or submission, but by consistency, competence, and principle. Even species that had once been skeptical began to recognize the wisdom of this approach. Cooperation, when rooted in respect and equality, produced far better results than compliance born of obligation or fear. The Council, observing these developments, began to feel a growing unease. Their attempts to maintain influence over human activities were increasingly ineffective. Restrictions on resources, pressure to return to negotiations, and indirect demands had little impact. Earth had proven that it could operate independently and still maintain productive, stable relationships with other species. The Council slowly realized that ignoring or dismissing humans was no longer a viable strategy. At the same time, humans were careful not to push other species unnecessarily. They avoided exploiting the situation or using their independence as leverage to dominate discussions. Instead, they focused on genuine partnership, helping where they could and providing guidance when requested. This calm, measured approach made humans even more respected across the galaxy. Other species noticed that Earth's influence was not about power. It was about integrity and the ability to contribute meaningfully without being taken for granted. As new partnerships formed, humans also began to share knowledge in ways they had not previously emphasized. Scientific discoveries, technological improvements, and innovative strategies were offered to trusted partners. The goal was not to control or direct, but to empower others to solve challenges collaboratively. By sharing knowledge selectively and thoughtfully, humans demonstrated that leadership could exist without domination, and cooperation could thrive without coercion. Trade and supply networks adjusted naturally under this model. Humans maintained efficiency while allowing for flexibility and adaptation. Other species found that working with Earth became smoother, not because of directives from the Council, but because humans valued clear communication, honesty, and fairness. The relationships became stronger precisely because they were built on choice and mutual benefit rather than obligation. Internally, Earth's leaders continued to focus on principle. Every decision was guided by the idea that cooperation should be based on respect, equality, and understanding. They reviewed ongoing projects to ensure resources were not being overextended and that participation was meaningful. This method reinforced the idea that true engagement required balance. It was not about quantity, but quality. Across the galaxy, smaller species took note. Some began reassessing their own roles in Council-led initiatives. They realized that blindly following mandates could create inefficiencies and resentment, while selective collaboration based on fairness and trust could produce far better results. Humanity's approach was quiet, but its example was becoming powerful. The galaxy was beginning to see that a world willing to assert its principles could still participate effectively and even inspire change. Humanity's independence also gave space for innovation. Freed from constant demands, humans explored new technologies, improved resource management, and developed systems that were more sustainable and resilient. Communities became more engaged, not because of external pressure, but because the work mattered. The result was a flourishing of creativity and problem-solving that strengthened Earth while benefiting partners in the galaxy. Even when the Council attempted to regain influence through indirect measures, humans adapted gracefully. They adjusted strategies, optimized resource use, and maintained communication with trusted partners. Every move demonstrated capability, flexibility, and integrity. There was no rash reaction or aggression, only steady, thoughtful action that maintained principle without sacrificing results. The galaxy began to recognize the unique nature of this approach. Influence could be achieved through calm decision-making, principle-driven engagement, and selective collaboration. Humans demonstrated that respect could not be demanded, it had to be earned and acknowledged. By refusing to participate under unfair conditions, Earth taught a lesson about boundaries, value, and the importance of integrity in every partnership. At the same time, humans continued to maintain essential interstellar systems. Trade, communication, and research networks remained functional, but the difference was clear. Humans were in control of the terms. They collaborated when it made sense, guided projects where their expertise was needed, and withdrew where demands were unreasonable. This careful balance allowed the galaxy to continue functioning while respecting Earth's principles. Many species quietly admired this approach. They observed how humans maintained influence without creating conflict, how they prioritized meaningful engagement over compliance, and how they balanced independence with cooperation. It became evident that humans were reshaping the way the galaxy understood partnership, trust, and collaboration. For Earth, the benefits were clear. Communities were stronger, innovation was flourishing, and partnerships were built on genuine trust. Humans had demonstrated that independence did not mean isolation. It meant thoughtful engagement based on principle. The galaxy was watching, learning, and adjusting its expectations. As this phase of humanity's strategy continued, the influence of Earth became increasingly evident. The Council realized that traditional methods of control no longer applied. Respect and fairness were now essential for meaningful engagement. Humans had proven that a calm, principled stance could achieve results far more effectively than pressure or coercion. By the end of this period, humanity had established a new model of interstellar collaboration. They had shown that independence and cooperation could coexist. That influence could arise from integrity rather than force, and that standing firm on principle did not require confrontation. The galaxy was learning that humans had changed the rules of engagement forever, and their example would shape future relationships for generations to come. Time passed, and the galaxy slowly began to feel the full impact of humanity's decision to step back from the Council. The absence of Earth's direct participation was no longer a subtle gap. It had become a noticeable shift that affected projects, trade, and diplomacy alike. The Council had spent years taking humans for granted, assuming they would comply quietly with any demand. But the calm withdrawal had proven that assumptions could be dangerous. Despite their absence from formal Council activities, humans remained active. They continued trade, research, and interstellar communication, but always on their own terms. They did not reject cooperation. They simply insisted that it be fair, balanced, and respectful. Every decision was deliberate, and every action demonstrated their principle. Participation must be meaningful, not burdensome. By maintaining this balance, humans ensured that essential systems continued to function without compromising their autonomy or values. The Council, meanwhile, began to face growing pressure from within its own ranks. Projects that relied on human expertise slowed, and trade routes that humans had long maintained efficiently required extra effort. Attempts to coordinate without Earth often fell short, revealing the depth of human contributions over decades. Some Council members finally acknowledged that they had underestimated the importance of Earth's role, though they did so quietly, mindful of the political implications. Recognizing the situation, the Council decided to take a new approach. They sent a formal message to Earth, requesting dialogue not as a demand, but as a genuine invitation to rebuild a cooperative relationship. This time, the tone was different. There were no threats, no pressures, no insistence that humans return under the previous terms. Instead, the message emphasized equality, respect, and partnership. It acknowledged that the Council had pushed too far and expressed a willingness to listen. Humans received the message with measured attention. They did not respond immediately. They carefully considered the words, analyzing the tone, the intentions, and the potential outcomes. Their silence was deliberate, signaling that they would engage only when the terms were clear and fair. Across the galaxy, other species watched closely, understanding that Earth's response would set the precedent for future cooperation. While the Council waited, humans focused on strengthening their communities and partnerships. They shared knowledge, collaborated selectively, and continued to contribute to projects that were meaningful and manageable. Their approach was consistent, calm, principled, and focused on integrity rather than compliance. This quiet but deliberate strategy continued to earn respect across the galaxy. Other species began to approach Earth with cautious optimism. They had observed humanity's restraint, their thoughtful decision-making, and their ability to maintain influence without force or aggression. These worlds recognized that humans were not acting out of stubbornness. They were acting out of principle. Many sought to build partnerships with Earth on fair terms, understanding that meaningful collaboration required respect for limits, contributions, and autonomy. The Council, watching these developments, realized that they could no longer operate under old assumptions. Influence could not be enforced. It had to be earned. Humanity had demonstrated that true cooperation was not about compliance or pressure. It was about mutual respect and shared purpose. This quiet revolution in diplomacy reshaped the expectations of the galaxy, encouraging a more thoughtful, balanced approach to interstellar relations. Eventually, humans agreed to a meeting with Council representatives. The discussions were unlike any previous negotiations. There was no haste, no rush, and no attempt to dominate. Humans outlined their expectations clearly. Any cooperation must respect boundaries, acknowledge contributions, and provide equitable participation. They emphasized that their engagement would be based on principle, not fear or obligation. Council members listened carefully. For the first time in decades, they were not dictating terms, they were learning. They realized that Earth's approach offered a new model for collaboration, one that could strengthen the galaxy rather than simply extracting resources or compliance. The discussions were long and thoughtful, exploring ways to balance responsibilities and respect across all species. This careful approach had a ripple effect. Other worlds began reassessing their own relationships with the Council, seeing that respect and fairness were essential for lasting cooperation. The human example demonstrated that influence and leadership could be achieved through integrity, calm strategy, and deliberate choices rather than pressure or coercion. As dialogue progressed, humans selectively re-engaged with the Council. They returned to projects and initiatives that aligned with their principles, offering expertise, resources, and guidance, but always on terms that were mutually acceptable. Their participation was no longer automatic or unconditional. Every decision reflected careful thought and an emphasis on fairness. Over time, the Council began to adapt. They learned to approach humans and other species with genuine consideration, listening rather than demanding. Negotiations became more collaborative, and agreements were shaped around shared benefit rather than unilateral expectation. Humans had reshaped not only their own role in the galaxy, but also the way cooperation was understood and executed across the stars. Beyond the Council, humanity's influence continued to grow through example. Smaller species and independent colonies began emulating Earth's approach. They realized that standing firm on principle did not require confrontation, and that meaningful cooperation could be achieved through calm, deliberate choices. Respect, integrity, and thoughtful engagement became increasingly recognized as essential for stable interstellar relationships. Earth itself flourished under this model. Communities became more resilient and innovative. Projects were pursued with purpose rather than obligation. Trade and communication networks were maintained efficiently, and partnerships thrived because they were built on trust and mutual understanding. Humans demonstrated that independence and collaboration could coexist, and that standing by principles could lead to better results for all parties involved. The Council, gradually adjusting to this new reality, began to acknowledge Earth's leadership in shaping a more balanced galaxy. They realized that humans had shown a path forward, not through dominance or force, but through measured action, patience, and principle. The lessons learned from Earth's approach would influence decisions and relationships across the galaxy for years to come. Finally, after months of careful reflection, the Council issued a formal statement. It acknowledged past mistakes, recognized the importance of humanity's contributions, and committed to building future relationships based on equality, respect, and mutual benefit. The message was deliberate, clear, and honest, signaling a new era in galactic cooperation. Humans responded thoughtfully. They accepted opportunities for collaboration where principles were honored and boundaries respected. They declined participation in initiatives that violated fairness or overextended resources. In doing so, they demonstrated that cooperation was not simply about showing up, it was about choosing engagement that was meaningful, sustainable, and respectful. By the end of this period, the galaxy had changed. The Council had learned that influence was earned, not assumed. Other species began to recognize the importance of fairness and principle in collaboration, and humans had solidified their position as a model for how a capable, thoughtful, and principled society could shape interstellar relations without aggression, domination, or compromise of integrity. The story concluded with a quiet but powerful truth. Respect could not be demanded. Influence could not be forced, and cooperation could only succeed when built on fairness, understanding, and mutual benefit. Humans had refused to negotiate under unfair conditions, and in doing so, They had reshaped the galaxy itself through calm, deliberate action, thoughtful engagement, and unwavering principle. Earth had proven that real strength lies not in power or intimidation, but in integrity, consistency, and the courage to set boundaries while still seeking connection. The galaxy now waited, knowing that the era of unbalanced expectation was over, and that humanity's approach would guide interstellar cooperation for generations to come.